All right, so we are going to talk about vitamin D versus the COVID-19 vaccine. Really, I'm going to be going through, and the majority of science that I have for you today is going to be in relationship to the benefits of vitamin D. All right, I think this is a subject that's not widely talked about enough in mainstream media, public health departments, advocacy groups, and things like that. It's really, truly sad because in all actuality, the science that's been available to us for multiple years now showed significant reductions in acute respiratory illness, and that is more of a syndrome. Acute respiratory illness or infection is a syndrome that is caused by hundreds, if not probably thousands of different viruses and bacteria. That is the syndrome, more of a severe respiratory state that is caused by COVID-19 or coronavirus. It's also caused by rhinoviruses, Coxsackie viruses, influenza, different bacterial strains, pneumonia strains, things like that. And what's sad is the science on vitamin D's benefits and potential for vitamin D supplementation to reduce all-cause acute respiratory syndrome, severe respiratory syndromes, is substantial. Its association with lower vitamin D levels, and your risk of dying from even heart disease, diabetes, children suffering from Kawasaki disease. And sadly, right now, they're using the deaths or severe illnesses of children with multi-system inflammatory syndrome, meaning multiple systems of the body, multiple organs of the child's body become so inflamed and damaged that then sometimes they may never recover. But the association and evidence for causation of low vitamin D levels causing Kawasaki disease or multi-system inflammatory syndrome, we've had that evidence for years now. Sadly, it's been ignored. And so we're going to kind of go through that today, and I want to get the evidence out there in a concise manner and give you multiple different research studies. Currently, probably the majority of them that I can find right now, and I believe they're the majority of the ones that have been published so far in the peer-reviewed medical scientific literature. Okay, I'm going to review scientific literature for you today. But simplistic, here's the steak and potatoes of what I want to talk about and show you. You'll be able to read through a British medical journal response by a medical professional who states that after analyzing the scientific studies, I believe it was Pfizer studies on their coronavirus vaccine of 40, now I think it's around 44,000 individuals that have been enrolled in that study that is being utilized to say that the coronavirus vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, is 90% effective. Well, they had I think it was 8 confirmed at the time period. It was roughly 8 confirmed cases, PCR tested cases. It didn't mean that they had lower respiratory illness rates. It didn't mean that they had lower hospitalization rates. It didn't mean that their 90% effectiveness claim didn't mean that they had lower death rates. So they didn't measure any of that. I did that in a prior study. I reviewed the British Medical Journal's report and even admission by the vaccine manufacturers. The manufacturers admit they were never even going to study whether this vaccine is capable of reducing severe acute respiratory illness, severe illness and hospitalization, or even death. They're not studying that. So their claim that it's 90% effective is simply because, well, the people they tested, only 8 came PCR positive in the vaccine group, while there's roughly 80 some in and again, I'm mentioning the interim analysis and some of the analysis, I believe it may be up to 94 now in the placebo or alternate vaccine group, was at, I believe it was 86 or 94. So that's how they claim 90% effective. But when they analyzed the information. When this individual analyzed the information with a very simplistic way of doing it, it's called the number needed to treat. So how many people would have to get the COVID-19 vaccine according to the data that the manufacturers are submitting to the FDA and governmental bodies to, approve this vaccine? Out of their numbers, how many people would have to receive that vaccine to reduce just a test positive, not reduce a death, not reduce a severe illness, just reduce PCR testing positive rates? All right? So one COVID-19 case, to reduce one COVID-19 case test positive, one person from testing positive, 256 people will have to receive the vaccine, according to the manufacturer's data. That does not mean a death would be prevented. That does not mean that a hospitalization would be prevented. That does not mean that lives will be saved. But if we take data that's accumulated over probably 30, 40 years on vitamin D and its critical need, or our critical need for vitamin D in our bloodstream, if we take that data and that science, the British Medical Journal reported that to avoid one acute respiratory illness, 33 people will need to supplement with vitamin D. So the number needed to treat, to reduce one acute respiratory illness, is 33 people would be supplementing with vitamin D on a regular basis. Now, further significance of that, which many people may think, and they're just comparing it between these two numbers, all right? One person, we would prevent one PCR positive case by giving 256 people the COVID-19 vaccine. All right? That is one respiratory illness, one virus, That's one virus. It's one virus out of hundreds of viruses that can cause respiratory illness and pneumonia. So even if we prevent people from testing positive for one virus, it doesn't mean we are reducing the risk of people succumbing to acute respiratory illness or acute respiratory severe illnesses that would take their life. But to prevent acute respiratory illness, which with vitamin D includes basically every single respiratory virus and bacteria. We have a blanketing effect to reduce illness, not just a test. Do you get me? The vaccine can reduce your chances of coming positive for one single virus, but is never and will never be shown before this vaccine is widely distributed throughout the world to reduce your risk of getting sick. That is what the science we have available to us right now proves and shows. All right? Again, you could say, well, maybe in the near future we'll have science that shows that the COVID vaccine has many different benefits and whatever. But we don't right now. But we do, and we have had science that shows vitamin D could reduce the risk of illness, people getting sick and succumbing to severe illness. And there's large bodies of evidence, significant studies showing they could reduce your risk of cancer, diabetes, Kawasaki disease, again, reducing the risk of that multi-system inflammatory syndrome seen in children, post-COVID-19 infections, reducing the risk of autism, reducing the risk of asthma, we could go on and on and on with the number of scientific studies that have shown vitamin D to have a blanketing, multi-system, multifaceted, beneficial effect on the human body. Reducing autoimmune diseases, reducing the risk of MS, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis. But yet, society and the world is sitting back right now saying, sadly, many of them, and more people are realizing that this is completely ridiculous, that we have wasted billions and trillions of dollars on the assumption that the only thing that can save society today and the world today from this virus is somehow a vaccine or a drug targeted at one virus. Meanwhile, ignoring the science that says supplying the body with what God designed the body to need, which is sunlight. I've got something funny for you in a little bit. Because I'm like, how could we get it in the winter months when people are bundled up and indoors? Well, what about light bulbs? Yeah, it's kind of funny. I think it's funny. You'll see in a minute. So it just, yeah, it's ridiculous, but we're ignoring it. You have to ask. You have to ask this. Why is the medical community, why is the World Health Organization, why is the National Institute of Health, why are our statewide task forces that are supposed to be doing everything they can to reduce the hospitalization rates? See, again, COVID-19 vaccines will not and have not been studied to reduce hospitalization rates, all right? But vitamin D status has been associated, better vitamin D status has been associated with lower risk of acute respiratory illnesses and severe illnesses in adults and the elderly and any level. I mean, in infants, they've done controlled randomized trials, and I'll show you and I'll give you the links. Again, because we've gotten censored, we can't do the TWD thing, and you can't do that. What do they have to do, Anthony? Is it again?
We're about to pin it in the comments.
All right. My staff are going to pin it in the comments here on Facebook, all right? And on YouTube in the future, we'll put it in the bottom in the description. There'll be a phone number there, I believe, they can text, and then they can get information sent to you, a link when we get this. Again, my staff follow up after these videos over the next several days, and they will post on thewilddoc.com on my website. Best thing you could do is go there and get on the email list. All right? So it's linked to the comments, and if you text there, I believe it's links, right? They text?
No, they'll text TWD.
Okay, so if you text TWD, then you'll get alerted when they put all the references and studies there. But infants, dose dependent, low dose, higher hospitalization rates for acute respiratory illness. And that includes, again, that is a syndrome which is caused by hundreds of viruses and bacteria. It reduces the risk of illness. And then children with the higher dose, less risk. So low dose, high dose, less risk of your child ending up sick. And folks, there's not a single study on the influenza vaccine or any vaccines that show lower risk of illness when children receive those vaccines. Now they may say, well, it does reduce measles. Yeah, but just because you reduce the risk of being diagnosed with measles, it doesn't mean your child has less risk of getting sick. Because what society has failed to realize, and I don't know how medicine can, and I've done this in prior videos, go search through all the videos I have on thewilddoc.com and you'll be able to find the Journal of American Medical Association. I believe it's Infectious Disease in the 21st Century. And if you take their graphs from the Journal of American Medical Association, you'll see from it was roughly like 1900, all right, to like 1950, the decline in infectious disease occurred very, very rapidly over those years. And then it plateaued around 1950, all right? It declined from 1900 to 1910. To 1918, it did spike because of the 1918 influenza pandemic. But then it continued to decline very, very rapidly in the 1930s, in the 1940s. In the 1950s, it slowly stopped declining, and then it plateaued from 1950 basically on. So it hasn't reduced since the 1950s. Well, when has all of the vaccines, childhood vaccines, and even adult vaccination campaigns, pneumonia, influenza, measles, mumps, rubella, DTP. DTP was the earliest nationwide vaccination campaign, all right? It was 1948 when they brought it to market and started giving it to some children, not all children. But even at 1948, it was already infectious diseases. All infectious diseases, death from all infectious diseases had already basically reached the lowest point they've reached in all of history in the US. And nothing has happened. Every time we implement those vaccines, we reduce the risk of your child being diagnosed with one type of infection, but we haven't reduced your child's risk of dying from illness. That is something that a lot of people, sadly, they can't wrap their heads around. But here we go. Flying through the science and research. But here's what I want to say too, is I have made a claim, promise, said what I'm going to do. I don't know how long I'm going to be able to hold out and do this. I've already found out that one of the suppliers of vitamin D supplements is not going to be able to do that because they're out of stock. Luckily, we have other suppliers that we're able to utilize, so I do have vitamin D in stock. But for people who truly, truly need it, this is for my community only. This is for my community, all right? This is for my patients who may need it, need the assistance. If somebody is in need, if somebody has a family member in need locally to Clarksville, Tennessee, and the reason I'm doing this is because, the reason I'm doing it for my community is because I believe other people should step up and do it for their community too. I can't do it for the world. Thankfully, England, the government in England is going to supply 2.5 million people who are considered their most vulnerable people. They're going to supply them with multiple months of vitamin D because the science is extremely clear. And I want to say this, it's extremely clear that governmental bodies in the United States don't care about reducing your risk of illness and dying. They simply are working with, because there's no excuse for them ignoring the science I'm about to go through with you. There's no excuse if their goal was reducing people getting sick and dying. There's no excuse for them to ignore the science that is available to us all and still claim that they want to save lives. And yet, they have sat here doing nothing to fortify the immune system response capability of people who are vulnerable in the US. Masks don't do it, and neither will a vaccine. They've ignored the science that could have saved lives, would have saved lives. And this isn't just in this last year, this is for multiple years they've ignored the science. And yet they have funded, taken your money and my money and handed it over to the most profitable industry in the world and the most criminal industry in the world. Folks, we gave money to the most profitable industry in the world, for which their products, like vaccines, have not been shown to reduce your child's risk of dying. Period. And I think that's probably the biggest thing a parent wants to do, is reduce their child's risk of dying. That is why most parents will probably sadly select to get their child the COVID-19 vaccine if it becomes available for children, because they believe a 90% effectiveness rate means it's 90% effective at reducing their child's risk of dying. It's not. It's never been proven to do that. The manufacturers have admitted that, and it's from the British Medical Journal. So I'm doing this for my community. If somebody truly, truly financially cannot afford to get vitamin D, then I will supply it for them. All right? If they've tested positive, and this isn't for everybody, this isn't for anybody who wants to get a free bottle of vitamin D. That is in no way, shape, or form what I'm doing. I've already had people, I'd love to be on vitamin D. Can I get a free bottle? No, you can't. If you told me, hey, I just tested positive for, and again, I don't even want to tell people how to do it. You know, I've kind of got into a situation where it's like, I don't know how to manage this. My staff don't necessarily know how to manage this. I want to step up for my community, for people who truly, truly need it, and I need to ask people to be honest with me. And this is not some super duper deal where you get a free bottle of vitamin D. That's not what this is. This isn't some cyber super duper Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, deal where you get free vitamin D. This is just if you truly need it. If you have a family member who truly needs it. If I know an amazing organization here locally, YAPACS, and if they have a homeless person who needs vitamin D because they just tested positive or are starting to get sicker and sicker, I will supply a free bottle for that person who is homeless. Those are the people who need it right now. If you can pay cost and that's all you can afford, if you can pay $5 and that's all you can afford, I'd appreciate that, because that covers some of the costs so that then somebody who truly may need the assistance in this time can get it. But it's more or less for people who need it and are becoming sick right now, okay? And if they need it and they can't afford it, then we'll step up and we're gonna help. That's what we're doing. So you have to use discernment and understanding that this isn't some free bottle for everybody. And I hope other people in other communities will step up and do the same. And my purpose, partially in doing this too, is to call out the fact that why hasn't our government, why hasn't our health department, we have spent, if we would have taken all the money we have spent on testing to see whether somebody possibly has the virus in their nasal passages, if we would have taken all of that money, put it all into vitamin D, the science says more people would be alive today. But we didn't do it because it's not about. You cannot claim the governmental bodies, the health departments, are about saving lives when they're not doing something to fortify and reduce the risk of people dying. England is doing it. Thank God for a nation's government that's willing to do it. Evidence that vitamin D supplementation could reduce risk of influenza and COVID-19 infections and death. This is influenza and COVID-19, folks. Now, I want to kind of point out why that is so significant. It goes back to the original understanding that we would save more lives by implementing vitamin D than any of these COVID vaccines, all right? So even back in the 1990s, Journal of Pediatrics, in 1999, actually showed that this one is in reference to zinc and diarrhea and pneumonia. I want to read a statement from this study, this article. Thus, on a worldwide public health level, it is likely to be more economically feasible than vaccines directed against specific organisms. Exactly what I just said. Even if we find a vaccine that eliminates COVID-19 from this world, we have just spent millions and billions of dollars, and we will spend trillions of dollars if we were to vaccinate the entire planet and reduce the risk of one single virus. If we did that, some would say, well, thank God. But we didn't save money. We didn't do what was most effective. We could have done vitamin D, which would have reduced the risk for anybody, everybody getting sick, and sick with any and all viruses. So I'd rather use a shotgun that could hit all 200 plus influenza-like illness causing viruses. And I'm mentioning that number because in the Cochrane Database of Systematic Reviews, when they talk about the ineffectiveness of the flu vaccine, the non-effectiveness of the flu vaccine in reducing illness in general, influenza-like illness, pneumonia in general. The vaccine didn't do it. They mentioned that there's over 200 different identified viruses that can cause influenza-like illness. And the vaccine didn't reduce your chances of getting sick from any of them, even the flu. But we could with vitamin D. It would be a blanketing effect. Vitamin D Supplementation to prevent acute respiratory infections, individual participant data meta-analysis. Ironically, this was republished in Health and Technology Assessment in 2019, the year before we got hit with this pandemic. And they even write above it, look at all that. They alert you that COVID-19 is rapidly evolving, emerging pandemic. We must do something about it. We must find a savior. Oh, it's right there underneath your alert. It says vitamin D. And it was a 2017 report in the British Medical Journal that found that to reduce acute respiratory illness, only to reduce one case, 33 should be supplementing. 33 people, we would reduce one acute respiratory illness. New evidence, and this is where it comes from, this is kind of where they broke it down, new evidence that vitamin D prevents respiratory infections. Again, 33 people. If 33 people took vitamin D supplements, one acute respiratory tract infection would be prevented. If these results are confirmed, vitamin D supplementation could potentially prevent millions of respiratory infections each year. See, even if you eliminate one respiratory infection cause, one virus, you have hundreds of other viruses that will just fill in the gap in a susceptible person. You haven't reduced the person's susceptibility of illness and death and pneumonia. You simply reduced their risk of a diagnosis, something written on their death certificate. COVID-19 vaccine candidate may be more than 90% effective. Interim results indicate. Again, if you read through this, and I'm linking this, again, if you get the number and you text TWD to that phone number in the comments on Facebook and then on YouTube in the future, you'll get it below. I think we should probably just put it on like our description in the on the website too. But just go there and read this person. This is extremely educated. The number needed to treat, that's what it says, number needed to treat with vaccines is around 256 to reduce one person testing positive for COVID-19. But that doesn't mean it reduces the risk of dying. So the 90% effectiveness is a marketing ploy. That's all it is. Because people's definition, the definition most mothers, fathers, grandparents, the population has for an effective vaccine, they believe the vaccine has been proven to reduce a person's risk of severe illness and death. That's what they believe. But again, the manufacturers admit they never attempted to even study that. So vitamin D and the immune system. Deficiency in vitamin D is associated with increased autoimmunity as well as an increased susceptibility to infection. So again, think about the benefits of supplementing with vitamin D. Something extremely inexpensive, decrease in autoimmunity and infection. Folks, you don't get that and we won't get that with a vaccine. I've already pointed out that it is well documented and proven that vaccines can cause autoimmunity. There's a darn textbook on it. There's an entire medical textbook documenting the many, and just pretend that I kept saying many times. Vaccines cause autoimmunity. So you could say, let's give the world the COVID-19 vaccine, which I did point out in prior videos, and you can get them on thewilddoc.com and you confirm this for me. Confirm my statements. In the baboon or primate studies, in the animal studies, the COVID-19 vaccine substantially increased interleukin 21. Which if you study interleukin 21 and you just go to PubMed and you type in IL-21 autoimmunity, guess what? You will find a huge body of science and very recent and new science that is now proving that IL-21 has a substantial role in causing people to develop autoimmune conditions like MS, Lou Gehrig's disease, autoimmune diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, all these different autoimmune conditions that are debilitating and deadly, and is one of the leading causes of death in middle-aged women these days. The vaccine causes a biological risk factor in the people, or at least the animals getting the vaccine. Again, they did this in animals, they haven't done it in humans, so they haven't proved that humans don't have the same physiological, immunological response, which is long-term elevated levels of IL-21 like they showed in the animal trial. All right, throughout the entire duration of the animal trial, IL-21 was increased. And if you do that, which is not a normal, healthy physiological response to have elevated IL-21, people who have long-term IL-21 increases have greater risk of developing autoimmune conditions. So vitamin D would reduce the risk of autoimmunity, would help people with autoimmunity, would reduce the risk of infectious illnesses of any type and every type, basically. But the vaccine can't do that. Which one do you want? And I know it. I know there's somebody out there saying, well, doc, you sell vitamin D and that's why you're doing this. Well, what if I am? I mean, is there a problem with that? I love it how people are like, you're just trying to make a buck. So is Pfizer. Pfizer's making more than a couple bucks. Oh, shoot. All right, Clinical Rheumatology 2016, July. Severe vitamin D deficiency in patients with Kawasaki disease. I already mentioned it. Just wanted to point out that heart and vascular abnormalities are reduced if somebody doesn't have vitamin D deficiency, your risk of that. And this multi-system inflammatory syndrome, all right, multiple systems of the child's body. I mean, this is heartbreaking. But again, I kind of bring this up in front of you guys here because you just go through that, and if a child dies from COVID, multi-system inflammatory syndrome, which is Kawasaki disease, all right? And you look, they're posting all these horrific pictures of children with severe illness, but yet no one's sitting here in the mainstream media and pointing out the science like I am, saying that we could have been, since 2016, utilizing the substantial body of evidence and science that shows we could have, those kids would have been alive today. Mark my words. Kids died because they ignored science. I'm not ignoring it. Natural doctors haven't been ignoring it. But health departments and government entities in the medical community have been ignoring it. Shoot, here's the biological textbook of immunology textbook for medical physicians to study, to pass their medical boards and pass their classes. It's got half a page on what your body needs to mount an immune response, but it explains what your body does during an immune response with all the other pages. You know what? They should have spent a quarter or less, or you know what? They would have been a lot more beneficial to have cited and referenced all the science on every single different vitamin and nutrient and mineral the body needs, and all the different stress factors, psychological and physical factors that lower the capability of the body to do all the things they explained. They should have cited all that stuff and reviewed all that for the medical physicians so they'd know what to give their patients when they... Well, we shouldn't even be saying that we should only give it to them when they get sick. We should be giving it to them so they don't get sick. But they mentioned vitamin D in here. Good for them. And B9, C, E, B6, zinc, vitamin A, and D. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 of them. 7 vitamins. That's it. And they don't even explain the best way to get them into the body or how to acquire them. That's the medical training for you, folks. That is why the medical community, upon the evidence, is woefully ill-equipped, and I'm going to pun intended, ill-equipped to prevent illness. Because they study how the body's immune response takes place, but they get half a page with only 7 mentioned vitamins that are needed for the body's immune response to even take place. Keep track on time, Anthony. 12:30, cool. Because at 1 o'clock I've got a call with another doc. So
12:33.
cool. I don't know if I got my volume down here, but I want to kind of take a look at some questions on Facebook here. And again, I always feel like I'm like beating a dead horse. Effects. This is a cool study, really, really cool study, and you have to ask why. This has not been mentioned. This is extremely recent, October 2020. The effect of calcifediol, okay? I know, probably butchered the pronunciation of that, but that is the active form of vitamin D in the bloodstream. Now, if you look at vitamin D supplements, you'll see cholecalciferol or calciferol. Cholecalciferol is vitamin D3, okay? You take that vitamin, it has to be absorbed through your gut, through your mucosal membrane. It can then be circulated through the blood, and then it has to go to the liver and then be converted to calcifediol, okay? So calcifediol in this study, it's a very intelligent study because they use the active form that just needed to go into the bloodstream. As soon as it's in the bloodstream is oral dosage of this, and it's more or less like a drug. You can't, and from what I understand and I've searched, you can't get it in supplement form, and if somebody knows how to get that form in supplement, and it's quite expensive, I found online. This is very inexpensive. All right, but calcifediol goes in the blood and it's immediately available for the use for your immune system to do what it needs to do to save a person's life. This study was huge, folks, huge. The study took 76 individuals that were admitted to the hospital with acute respiratory syndrome or respiratory illness, all right, due to confirmed PCR-tested, confirmed COVID-19, all right? So they had the SARS coronavirus 2 in their sinus passages. They took a huge dosage, all right? And again, I'm going to say this. I'm not going to even quote the dosage or anything like that. It was multiple tens of thousands of it. I think if I recall, there's 2 studies. I think they're taking upwards of like 60,000 IUs. Another study was, and that study will be mentioned next. But tens of thousands IU of this that could be immediately absorbed. Once absorbed into the bloodstream, it's there and it's effective. All right? It's able to be used by your cells to mount and do what it needs to do for immunomodulation. And what's amazing about vitamin D, it helps to strengthen your immune system, but it helps to resolve the inflammation caused by an immune response that's necessary to prevent pneumonia. All right? The inflammatory conditions that result in severe disease and death rates. So out of the 50 that were given vitamin D, and again, it was the immediate active form, all right? Supplements on the market right now, you have to take, and it takes 3-4 days for it to be processed after it's absorbed, to be processed by your liver, converted to the active form, and then your cells can use it for the necessary immunological responses to resolve inflammation and ultimately do what's needed to be done to save a life, all right? But in this trial, out of the 50 that were given calcifediol, guess what? 1 ended up in the ICU. That's a 2% chance. For anybody admitted to, again, small study. You could say very small study, throw it out. No, because the p-value of the study, I believe, was 0.001. That's basically 1 in 1,000 chances for this study to not be giving us accurate scientific evidence for the application of this right here, for vitamin D. For everybody admitted to the hospital, but our NIH, National Institute of Health, our CDC, our health departments locally, in Tennessee at least, are not telling medical physicians in hospitals to immediately be administering calcifediol to all of their COVID-19 patients being admitted to the hospital, despite a 1 in 1,000 chances that this study is not accurate and not truthful, and it wasn't published like the vaccine trials. It wasn't published, and it wasn't paid for, and it wasn't provided to you by the manufacturers of vitamin D supplements. All right? The manufacturers of the vaccines get to tell the FDA and give to the FDA the data they want to give. They're the ones paying and doing the trials and paying the doctors who are doing the trials. They're the ones doing that. And we're supposed to trust the most criminal organization in the world? Again, according to the DOJ's website in America, Department of Justice, Pfizer is one of the most criminal organizations in the U.S. Lied to the FDA multiple times about safety and effectiveness of drugs and vaccines over the years, proven in courts. But we're going to trust them to give the data. Meanwhile, I bet you we're going to see people say, too small study, not enough significance, too small. Yeah, 1 in 1,000 chances that this is not accurate. And you know what? The fact that vitamin D is safe. If my grandma ends up in the hospital and that doctor ain't giving calcifediol to her, I ain't going to do anything to him because I'm a Christian. But I'd want to with my worldly heart. My human heart, mind, frustration, anger, if they didn't do that for my grandma, I'd be a little pissed off. But again, turned over a new leaf and I wouldn't do anything to them. I might yell at them a little bit. Put them in their place verbally. Show them the scientific study. I don't know why it came to my brain. I would maybe douse it with vitamin D and make him eat it. Anthony's like, what in the world? I know, that's really weird. It's like I'm doing something good for him. Here, eat vitamin D on the paper that study's printed on. Because it's just sad. It really, really is sad that this science has not been immediately instituted. And again, so the results, 50 given vitamin D, high doses upon admission for acute respiratory syndrome, acute respiratory illness, pneumonia confirmed on x-rays. Guess what? COVID-19 patients admitted to the hospital with pneumonia, 1 out of 50 ended up in the ICU. Out of the 26 who were not given, and thank you, Jesus Christ, for allowing them to choose to give vitamin D to 2/3 of the patients, and 1/3 didn't get vitamin D. Because guess what? The researchers are like, it's common sense. Vitamin D is necessary for a healthier immune response, and all the science that's been done on infectious illnesses and even COVID-19 over the last year shows that there is a huge association with lower vitamin D levels and more severe illness. So let's just do a 2/3 versus 1/3, 1/3 the control group. Let's not give them vitamin D. But they were all getting all the drugs, zithromycin, hydroxychloroquine, the standard medical practices in that country. All right? So they're getting the hydroxychloroquine that I'm seeing way too many natural people say, that's a great drug, we should give that drug. And I'm like, I heard doctors and the frontline doctors and natural health people toting that way more than we've been toting this, and I'm at fault of that too. I understand. Not promoting hydroxychloroquine, I'm not at fault of that. I'm at fault of not talking enough about the importance of this, because to me at times I'm just like, that's common sense. By this point in time, it should be, but I'm finding out very, very quickly the amounts that people should be taking, the fact that they should be taking it is not common sense. Even within some of the people who are like, yeah, I feel like I'm fairly healthy, I feel like I'm naturally minded, yeah, I don't like drugs, but there's just a lack of information, effective and beneficial information being given to people. Now the 26, again, so let's go, here's the results. Of this study, the effect of calcifediol, which is the active form, doesn't have to be converted by the liver. Immediately once it's in the bloodstream, its ability to help your cells mount an effective, healthy immune response and protect you from progression of illness is amazing. Guess what? This is the best available therapy. Though they said they were giving the best available therapy to these patients, out of the 50 given vitamin D, 1 wound up in the ICU, none of them died, all of them went home to their friends and family. Out of the 26 that were not given vitamin D, 13 ended up in the ICU and 2 of them died. 2 people didn't get to go home to their family. The science on vitamin D is far superior than the science on the COVID vaccine and the science that will be used to push and possibly mandate and possibly force the COVID-19 vaccine. The science is superior. And yeah, you could say, well, that was 44,000 people that got the COVID-19 vaccine. Yeah, the science isn't as effective as this is. Because again, we're allowing the lying, cheating, stealing, murdering Pfizer to do their own publishing of their science and submit the paperwork to the FDA for approval. That's huge. This cannot be ignored, and the fact that it has been ignored so far for multiple months by the World Health Organization, the CDC, and other organizations, and not implemented yet, when it's cheap, it's harmless, and there's 1 in 1,000 chances that this could be wrong, so then there's a 999 chances that it's correct out of 1,000, we are letting people die, and it is medical neglect. They are being negligent not to immediately alert every single hospital out there to keep as much of this on hand as possible. We need to stockpile this at hospitals and not stockpile ventilators. Because if we stockpile this, and they got out of the hospital sooner, so we'd have more hospital beds, but then if people are taking the one that needs to be converted by your liver, they're taking vitamin D supplements, not as many people would be admitted to the hospital, and that's what this study shows. The British Medical Journal, short-term, high-dose vitamin D supplementation for COVID-19 disease, a randomized, placebo-controlled study, the SHADE study. Stay out of the shade. I thought it was hilarious. I'm like, the SHADE study? That's hilarious. Oh, they're so smart. Anyways, this is all, this kind of stuff is so cool. But it's like, so we've had 2 randomized trials for the purpose of evaluating the effect of vitamin D. And this was vitamin D like you can buy off the shelves. All right? This was calcifediol. It was not the active, immediately active form. Calcifediol is immediately active form, doesn't need to be converted by the liver. Calcifediol is going to need to be converted by the liver. So these people were already testing positive for PCR tests on COVID-19, SARS coronavirus 2. And guess what? They cleared the virus earlier, meaning they were less chances of spreading it to other people. And they weren't getting as sick. They weren't winding up in the hospital as often. Journal Plus One, vitamin D sufficiency, having sufficient amounts of vitamin D at 30 nanograms per milliliter reduced the risk of adverse clinical outcomes in patients with COVID-19 infection. So again, you have controlled trials, randomized controlled trials showing a reduction in the groups being given the vitamin, and then you have association type studies, observational studies, just looking at the amount of vitamin D in the bloodstream of people and just watching what happened. If you've got higher vitamin D, less risk of severe adverse events, clinical outcomes, and death in those with higher vitamin D levels. Again, this study was published back in September, still being ignored. Preventive effects, and being ignored means we're not screaming it from the rooftops. And I do admit that I've not gotten on top of a roof yet and screamed it either. So maybe I need to do that. Maybe we should do a video of me. Things to do today on my to-do list. Yell it from the rooftops, because I've said people need to yell it from the rooftops. Please take it. Maybe we should start, remember the ice bucket challenge? We should totally start like a, but then like what if somebody like, well, Dr. Dale needs to be sued because somebody fell off the roof. And it is coming in the winter months and it did freeze and it's like, so don't get on your roof. Don't do that.
Bad idea.
Bad idea. Not even going to finish the thought. All right, Journal of Pediatric Infectious Disease Journal. Again, we would have side benefits to vitamin D. That is the point with this study as well. Preventive effects of vitamin D. This is not specific to COVID-19, but since 2018 August, preventive effects of vitamin D, different dosages, low dose, high dose. The low dose, higher infant infectious disease rates and hospitalizations. Higher doses of vitamin D, lower rates. And again, what I want people to do is get the dosages from there because I do not want to be marked as somebody giving recommendations on a social media platform, all right? Later date, maybe I'll go through the numbers, all right? What do I do for myself? Actually, I can do this. While I'm talking on it and mentioning it, here we go. I will go through one study. The role of vitamin D in prevention of coronavirus disease, 2019 infection and mortality. Okay, this was back in May. This is what these scientists and researchers and MDs and PhDs said. Vitamin D deficiency has been found to contribute to acute respiratory distress syndrome. It is the syndrome that leads to the inflammation or caused by the inflammation that ultimately can potentially cause the death of the individual. All right, that is the syndrome caused by not only the flu, not only COVID-19, but hundreds of other viruses and bacteria. But vitamin D can reduce the risk of the syndrome caused by hundreds of viruses for which a vaccine directed at a single virus cannot do. The case fatality rates increase with age and chronic disease comorbidity, both of which are associated with lower vitamin D. The comorbidity conditions like diabetes and obesity and being African American, being of darker skin, are all associated with lower vitamin D levels. So the conditions that are associated with a higher risk of COVID-19 causing the person to die are the same things that are associated with lower vitamin D. Even more research for the need for vitamin D supplementation to be recommended for everybody starting back in May. To reduce the risk of infection, it is recommended. So they recommend it, I'm not recommending it, I'm just recommending you read it. And then potentially do what it says. Kind of like my pastor says, is read your Bible, do what it says. And then people say, don't lay hands on the sick. Put them in a room and don't go near them. So you're not doing what it says. So if you're going to my church and you say, don't lay hands on the sick, including COVID-19, you're not listening to pastor who says, read your Bible, do what it says. Okay, yeah, there's a little, yeah, I'm poking because I'm kind of frustrated about something. It's personal. All right. It is recommended that people at risk of influenza and or COVID-19, and it should say and or the hundreds and potentially thousands of viruses and bacteria that can cause respiratory distress syndrome, acute respiratory distress syndrome, should consider taking 10,000 IUs of vitamin D per day for a few weeks to rapidly increase their blood concentrations of vitamin D, and then followed by 5,000 IUs of vitamin D per day. They don't give ages or anything like that. The risks in supplement or administration of vitamin D is the harms they've found with administration of vitamin D has been in injection of hundreds of thousands of IUs immediately, and it was increase in falls. Like really the evidence for harm of vitamin D supplementation, or not even supplementation, injection. That was found to have some harms, but again, the study even said that it's never been seen in oral supplementation. It was found in injection of hundreds of thousands of IUs immediately, and it was with falls. So probably a person laying in a bed, it might save their life if they injected vitamin D in the hospital, because they haven't got a risk of falling if they're laying down unconscious, right? Anyway, just with my brain. Sorry, it went on an unnecessary tangent. For 7 minutes. For a few weeks, to rapidly increase vitamin D concentration, followed by 5,000 IUs, raised vitamin D concentration. Can you check the door, whoever that is? Raised vitamin D concentrations above 40 to 60 nanograms per milliliter. That is what you should increase it to. So really, if you want to do your best, go get a cheap, inexpensive vitamin D test. Figure out where your numbers are. Be supplementing beforehand too, according to that. And then if you're 60, 80, go right to the 5,000 IUs if you're an adult. That's what we could gather and assume, and I understand that everybody's going to say right away, well, doc, you made an A out of you and me, and I did not. Association of vitamin D status. So folks, let's just do this real quick. All right. Lowers the infection rate in infants. Ignored. Vitamin D and inflammation, potential implications for severity of COVID-19. All right. May of 2020. Ignored. All right. They even showed, ironically, that in sunnier countries of Spain and Italy, particularly northern Italy, where the death rate was horrific, they had the lowest vitamin D rates. In other countries experiencing the highest infection rates and death rates had lower vitamin D rates. Ignored since May. Vitamin D deficiency as a predictor for poor prognosis in patients with acute respiratory failure due to COVID-19. Back in August, so far seems to be ignored, except by England and me and a few other, and quite a few other natural doctors and natural-minded people. So it's like the natural-minded people are supposed to be the crazy ones. The crazy people are listening to the science. Association of vitamin D status and other clinical characteristics with COVID-19 test results. Even test results can be improved. Less test result positives if you have better COVID-19 or vitamin D status. So we would reduce test results if we supplemented. And if we just stopped testing and started supplementing, we would have way more people alive next month. But I bet you our government's not going to do it. Mark my words. 1 month from now, let's see if they do it. Low serum hydroxyvitamin D levels in patients hospitalized with COVID-19 are associated with greater disease severity. So low vitamin D level. God, more science. And again, when was that published? July. Still ignored. 25-hydroxy D concentration are lower in patients with positive PCR COVID-19 tests. All right. And that was back in May. Again, received April. Published in May. Ignored. The role of vitamin D. Already went through that one. That was the study where they actually gave you recommended dosages for adults. Again, body weight, you reduce, you likely. I had one question from a mother who's breastfeeding, and she has actually tested her vitamin D levels, and she's in the 60s, and she's exclusively breastfeeding her infant. She asked, would I recommend giving vitamin D to her baby? And honestly, if you were my wife, I would feel no necessity in my spirit to be giving my infant vitamin D. Because if my wife's levels are there, I fully trust God's design in what He gave you, how He designed your body, Mom, to be able to create the beneficial effects, the amount of vitamin D, the amount of nutrients, and all the other things. And on top of that, if your vitamin D, Mom, is at that level, and you're supplementing and keeping it there, your baby will send you chemokines, communicator messengers through their saliva to tell your body, without even you consciously knowing it, that your baby may be infected with a virus or bacteria. And your body, Mom, is so beautiful and amazing. And the potential for you to protect your baby is way better than any supplement man can make. And that was something God gave you. All right, and I'm just going to end it on that, I think. I think that's like one of the coolest things I've ever been able to say. And I think I'm just like, I'm walking away. End it on a good note. Anybody watch Seinfeld?
Yeah.
When Jerry, no, it wasn't Jerry. The shorter, bigger guy.
What's his name? I can't think of it.
Why can't I think of it? You would say a joke and he'd be like, "In them out!" He just got somewhere. He's like, "In them out!" They'd laugh. And But I get you some other studies here too, immunomodulatory effects for viral infections and vitamin D, association of vitamin D deficiency and mortality in critically ill adult patients, all of that stuff. So all those studies and many, and just pretend I said many times, many more. It's been ignored. You cannot sit back and read and see this science and see how it's been ignored by the authorities and how they push the idea that the only saving grace, the only thing that we could possibly save humanity with is some sort of vaccine. You cannot sit back and say that their efforts are for the sole purpose to save lives when they have ignored this right here. You cannot. And it's truly sad because there is way too many people who have lost their lives over the last year to many different illnesses and conditions that vitamin D supplementation could have prevented their death. Folks, please share this information, tag a friend, family member, get this information into the hands of people you know. Be sitting down, taking the science, understanding it, sitting down with your legislators, your politicians, going to your health departments, because I can't, so I need somebody locally to do it, because I had a lawyer send me a letter and said I'm not allowed to talk to our health director anymore because I challenged him on, okay, there we go, again. Personal issues coming into it. Because I somehow, asking about the research is somehow harassment when you're asking authorities to give you research and they don't, and you keep asking. That's harassment when they're supposed to be using the research to save lives. Anyways, 1 minute, need to get going. I love you all, I appreciate you all. I do apologize. Again, I'm getting this information out there just because this science is what fortifies the arguments that we have as natural health doctors, chiropractors, natural health, advocates. We can save lives better than the way they're doing it right now. Honestly, we can. If we used all the money that's spent on developing these vaccines, using the drugs. They were using the drugs in the vitamin D trials, and look at the results just with vitamin D. And you could say maybe it was a synergistic effect, a hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin and D that made the amazing results. And if you just used vitamin D, you wouldn't get those results. But the results of that study were massive. Again, I could say so many more things, and I really want to go through questions, but I'll try and jump on and just kind of type up some answers and stuff if you got questions in the comments. And a lot of times we accumulate those questions and we write them down later. What?
It was George.
George.
Yeah, they were commenting about Seinfeld. It was George.
George! Thank you!
You're like, it's George.
I don't watch a lot of TV, so I remember those hilarious little outtakes. So I do appreciate you all. I do love you all. So again, I just want people to do their best to be able to get information out there. Let's save lives. Let's help people, because the reality is we could do that. If we got enough people to understand this stuff, maybe we could eliminate this scare tactics. We could eliminate their ability to override our constitutional rights, or try to override our constitutional rights. The benefits of just this information and beyond saving lives is exponential. So we could get people out of lockdown. We could let kids go back to school. We could do so many good things with one single inexpensive supplement. It's amazing. It's something God said your body needs. So I love you all, appreciate you all. Again, share the truth, don't just like it, because if you like it alone, we're not going to be able to save as many lives. And then supplement with your vitamin D too, while you like it. Be like, I want to supplement, as I hit like on Facebook and share on YouTube. And as I go to thewilddoc.com and I go to the website and I say, hey, I want to sign up for the email campaign system, since the Wild Doc will probably get censored on Facebook and kicked off eventually. So I'm going to do that so I can always stay in contact with that cool guy. If you don't think I'm cool, that's cool with me. All right. Anyways, I don't know. These are funny to me and I shouldn't say them. I understand. My wife will remind me of it later on. Okay? But I love you all still. Bye.